mobile is a cookieless environment. It's increasing fragmentation of unique user identification in mobile. So those are the two primary reasons, I think.
What about first-party versus third-party data? I mean, there's so much information out there, right? In terms of, with first-party, marketers have a ton of information on their customers. Publishers have first-party. Networks have third-party. And then there's data companies out there. And what's the right way that advertisers should be looking at this, and what kind of combination to get in front of the right customer?
Well, I mean, part of it's still, because we're in these early days, a lot of it is taking whatever data we can get and trying to see, so there's just because, scale's often something that we're trying to achieve for mobile media buy, for instance, then we'll take a lot of that third-party data and not go individual publisher and kind of like have these like $2,500 buys, exaggerating, of course, but so third-party data is really paramount. Then there's still the challenge, though, of just the reliability of it and making sure we can understand that piece.
Well, let me dig into that a little bit.
Okay.
What's more important with that? Is it getting the data on the front end so you can put the best plan together, or data on the back end finding out who you actually reached?
Well, a lot, and it's funny because that goes into a lot of different pieces of it, because I think one of the biggest challenges for mobile, from what I've seen, is figuring out the questions to ask internally before we run any campaign, so that we're doing something that really gets into the differences in consumer behavior on mobile versus PC and other media. So getting to understand that is usually, so there's a lot of that data that we need before we run anything, and that's something that that data is largely out there when we know what to ask for, and so we're getting better at it, but we just constantly need to be more proactive at it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree. I think those two things are inextricably linked, right? Not to go back to the whole garbage in, garbage out scenario, but I think that's exactly what it is. We need to be mindful of what we're trying to do and who we're trying to target, and then we're able to take a read on that on the back end. I think in terms of first party versus third party, right now, in some instances, it's more comfortable to work with third-party data because we're sort of integrating it in the desktop world, and we're starting to integrate it more easily in the mobile world. But I think first-party data becomes really interesting when we can sort of connect different types of data. For example, on the publisher end, although publisher is a misnomer, players like Apple with iTunes, Amazon, certainly the first-party data that they have, that they're working with, is tremendous, of tremendous use to different marketers and brands. And I think if we can map that to some of our first-party brand data, that becomes extremely powerful. It's harder to do, it's scarier to do, but I think so some combination of the both, once we get a little bit more comfortable in this space, will be the most impactful.
Yeah, I've got to believe it's pretty overwhelming from an agency client perspective with all the different types of data sets that come in, and how do you evaluate kind of one versus the other in terms of kind of, which is best. My perspective is you've got to look at all the different types of data that are out there and kind of test them to figure out kind of what's going to work best. I mean, with JiWire, for example, we're a location company, right? So our data set is basically based on location behavior. So is location behavior better than contextual targeting, as an example? You've got to kind of test it to figure it out, right? To make sure that you're taking the best approach, and the best approach for one campaign may not be the best approach for another campaign. There may be a campaign where contextual targeting is actually the better way to go, and other types of campaigns where understanding location behavior is actually a better way to go. So it's fairly overwhelming right now, and I think what happens a lot of times, at least I see it with clients when I'm out talking to clients, is I call it this data paralysis. It's like, oh shit, there's so much data, I just don't know what to do, so I'm going to do nothing, right? And it's really not the right approach to kind of move this business forward. So we always just try and encourage people to look, just do something. Like take different data sets, test it, figure out what's going to work, what's going to perform for you, and really kind of then start driving it forward from there.
How fine-tuned are we with location right now? So, for example, we're across the street from the Intrepid, right? So if somebody was looking to target this particular location, are we getting a bunch of people in the mobile business, or are we getting tourists from Indiana?
So that's a great question. So I think that it's not just about kind of where they are right now, it's also where they've been, right? So so you've got to, if you can understand, so for example, if I see a device show up at 10 o'clock in the morning at the Bronx Zoo, and then I see that device show up at 1 o'clock in the afternoon at a Toys R Us, and then I see that device show up at 4 o'clock in the afternoon outside of a school, I can start to make some assumptions about kind of who belongs to that device, right? It's probably a mom, right? A mom or a parent or something like that. So it's not just using where they are today, which I think is, there are companies out there that are using that as kind of like, okay, and that's geofencing, right? So geofencing is great, but then you have the scale issues of can you actually deliver a really good campaign at scale when you're just geofencing the Hudson Terrace, right? So, so I think it's really looking at, so from our perspective, we look at kind of a longer term location behavior to really understand kind of the audience segment that that person belongs to, and then start kind of testing our theories there to see, okay, is that really a mom? And we'll know by better performance against advertising that's directed to a mom.
So I have 2 points on this. One is we need good data. And I think I have a slightly different perspective about first versus third party. We at AdMobius, we combine first party data with third party data, mobile. We launched the company last week with the first audience management platform. I think we need an entity, and AdMobius is one of those entities that provides transparent, quantifiable, good data. I think it's less relevant whether first party or third party as much as reliability, precision, and transparency to the buyer. And then the second point is, I think one-sided dimensions in data are a bit limited. It's not, to me, it's not about is location data better than behavior data? Is behavior data better than location data? Our experience at AdMobius is that we put it all together, and the more multidimensional, the better it is, and the more relevant we can figure out consumers' interest.
Great. I want to take a show of hands in the room. How many people here work in an agency? How many work at a brand? How many sell something? Okay, great. So good mix of people here. So why don't we? Actually, I'm gonna focus on Colleen and David here, from the agency perspective, right? So you have a few different audiences here, right? So let's flip it to Steve and Dan from the sales perspective, right? What do you guys really care about? What kind of direction and questions do you have for agencies and clients in order to put together the best campaigns?
You want to go first?
Sure, yeah. So I think we're at a stage, I think data is increasingly important. I mean, we've seen, the amount of RFPs that are fairly demanding in terms of audience needs increasing. That's a good thing. I think we need scale. We need good data, as I mentioned before. I don't think that the market is ready yet for, hyper-targeted audience data. I think, we're lacking basic demographics. I think we're lacking, verticalized data, if you will, to help agencies and brands reach their audience. So my perspective is one that says, I want to be able to enable brands and agencies to use this data and deliver through whichever delivery platform, be it an exchange or a network, whichever platform they want. So that's kind of my perspective. I want to be an enabler and a strategic partner.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us to be successful and for our agency partners and clients to be successful, we've got to get kind of further upstream, kind of before the RFP, to really understand not only kind of what their goals and objectives are around mobile, but what they are kind of from a broader perspective. Because as Colleen just said, I mean, mobile, it's always just part of something bigger. And I think, particularly, as kind of publishers, we need to get over ourselves a little bit and understand that, like, we are not the center of the universe, and it's not all about kind of what we can sell. It's about what we can do that can enable other parts of a campaign to be more successful, or to really kind of understand kind of success. But then what we also need is an understanding from the agencies and from the clients. We need a clear understanding of how they're measuring success. So for example, I mean, if you're running a retail activation campaign where the whole goal of the campaign is to drive someone to the front door of a store, I mean, we've gotten knocked down because our click-through rate was bad. And it's like, okay, but we're not really trying to drive somebody to your website. We're trying to drive somebody to your front door, and we've got pretty good metrics there. So it's really understanding and agreeing up front kind of on the metrics that are going to determine success of the mobile campaign as well. But I think it you know, kind of, it all boils down to kind of being better partners and not just vendors, and driving that conversation further upstream so we can really understand what's going on, you know, with the marketing goals and everything else.
So you hit on a couple of really interesting things there, right? So you're driving action and not necessarily clicks, right? How do you prove it? How do you prove that back to the client so that they understand that this worked?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, one of the things that is kind of a proxy metric we use a lot is what we call kind of intent to visit. So we can look at, for example, all the actions that the consumer is taking inside of that advertising unit. They're checking store location views, they're getting driving directions, they're doing all these different things that tell me a pretty good understanding of, okay, they're thinking about going to visit. The real challenge is closing the loop right now. And I don't believe that's purely on us. I think that's an industry-wide challenge. I mean, you know, again, we work with a lot of retail clients or people who are sold in retail who, you know, they want to measure, like, you know, when somebody's in the store, like, did they scan a coupon? But yeah, we don't have scanners or readers in store to be actually able to do that. There's a huge kind of infrastructure thing that still has to happen on the back end to really be able to close that loop. So as much as we can kind of offer up potential solutions to be able to do that, a lot of them you still can't do. So, so again, I think it's an industry thing that everybody's going to get behind. You know, how are we, you know, and if you think about it, I mean, just a quick anecdote, you know, my daughter is already prepping for Halloween. So we went to the Spirit Halloween store, right, and pulled up online. They had a coupon online, but it said you had to print it out and bring it. But it's a mobile, so I went in and I'm like, okay, here's my coupon. Can I use this? We're like, no, you have to print it out. But I said, but it's on my phone. Like, really? So, you know, again, that's just somebody not thinking through, let's put a coupon up there, but then not allow consumers to redeem it because they didn't go home and print it out on their printer and then bring in a physical piece of paper. So there's still a lot of, I think, a thought that has to go through the industry on, you know, how do we really close the loop on this thing and make it, you know, really measurable.
Yeah, and things like that are definitely top of mind because even when we do consider it, it's not always possible. I mean, we actually did a program like that for Oscar Mayer with a couponing deal through Facebook originally, but you know, really about drive to store, and yet it had to be a printed home thing because that was the approved vendor and the process, and frankly, getting supermarket retailers. Really, really tough beyond Target and a few others to accept any kind of couponing. So it's still, I mean, you see all of that kind of fragmentation where we see this stuff, we know what should be done, we know the user experience, and yet we just can't pull it off for a lot of different reasons yet.
I think I completely agree. Infrastructure tends to be a big issue. I think it goes back to being clear about what the role of mobile is, because as it grows, I think getting over hurdles like that will require longer term planning, et cetera, but those conversations should happen. I think even at a more shallow level, I guess, even from having optimized mobile assets, whether it's apps or sites, oftentimes we go back to the creative formats and the content experience that we're used to from a web perspective, and that's a huge, huge mistake. So I think even just planning at that sort of base level for what the mobile optimized experience will be could get us sort of way ahead of where we're at today. You mentioned click-through rate. Anybody, I think at the last time I spoke on this, I used some unfavorable words. I have sort of an allergic reaction to it in any screen. But I think that if we consider more native features of the phone, so rather than clicking, can we do a click to call? Can we do a map this store? Can we do an add to calendar? Like, there are more creative ways to look at behavioral engagement, and then we should translate that to sort of brand-owned experiences within the mobile space. So giving thought to what that experience looks like for the mobile web or for an app, I think gets us a little bit closer to sort of the nirvana of, you know, optimizing the in-store experience as well.
One of the panels earlier this morning talked about the need to prove the ROI And that's one of the main things that was keeping people up at night and slowing down the growth of mobile. Yet, what I'm hearing here today is that we need to experiment. We need to experiment more, and we're not necessarily going to definitively prove the ROI. So are we kind of like caught in this cycle here where we're not going to drive innovation? Fast enough.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's still so much, again, going back to that learning curve where, I mean, we're trying so many different kinds of targeting at once, and it's like, okay, well, maybe it's a shame that we're not kind of putting our eggs in just a few baskets and doing some bigger buys, more select players, but there's so much we want to learn, and so, yeah, I mean, there's stuff that we didn't get into yet in terms of like multi-screen targeting, right? And so yeah, I mean, we're doing things with Yahoo where you could target once someone's logged in and you could target across different devices and you know who they are, but we also know that's only Yahoo users. So we're also trying some of the IP-based targeting things, and now there's a new one of those that's calling us every single day, and some of them are really good. And so we're not just settling on any one thing just yet. Even if we think even if the Yahoo thing worked great, we still know that there's a huge chunk of the audience we're missing, so we got to keep going forward.
Yeah, I think it's redefining ROI is what it is, right? I mean, I had a very smart client one time who called ROI return on idea, so not return on investment. So so basically, David, to kind of your point, it's understanding. I mean, test different things, but be clear about what the metrics of success are. I mean, again, I have a lot of people. We'll try mobile. So, well, that's great. How about test mobile, right? Like, actually have like clearly definable metrics up front, and then kind of measure success on the back end to determine whether it works or not. Don't just throw a bunch of money out there and hope it works without really knowing if it's going to or not. So for me, I think it's really, we're in this phase right now where we've got to, and again, I think the publishers and the agencies particularly need to take the lead on this and kind of redefining ROI for our clients. In that, really it's about kind of measuring the return on different approaches, and then slowly start kind of narrowing those down to figure out kind of what are the best approaches for those particular campaigns or brands.
I think we're at an interesting point. I mean, sure, for some brands, Sony Theatrical in our case, right? Mobile is a transactional channel. We can measure ticket sales. It's easy-ish. But for other brands, it's about attitudinal change or just behaviors that we're trying to change. And so I think you're right. It's about defining those proxies more specifically. So if we know we can't get direct sales or market share or whatever the case is, let's talk about the best proxy to get us there and weight those proxies, et cetera. So again, it goes into that sort of front end conversation of what are we trying to do? How will we know we did it? Right? It's pretty simple in that sense. But I think we're at this really interesting point, at least from my vantage point. I meet with so many different types of companies, and we have properties and networks that offer tremendous scale and sort of more advanced ad models, which is helpful for us because we like to spend money on advertising. But we also meet with these smaller platforms that are focused entirely on utility and creativity. And to me, that's where I'm seeing a lot of innovation and sort of exploration of the potential of mobile platforms. And so I think every day we're getting closer to kind of merging those two. And I think that's going to be really important. That'll be the sort of fundamental intersection of innovation and ROI, because we'll have the tools that we're familiar with, but we'll also have the result of some of our experimentation to scale out.
So how do you value or price data? Is this part of an overall program? Do you blend it into CPMs? Is it a separate line item?
I'll take that. Well, it depends. It's going to be my answer. In some cases, it'll be blended into CPMs, but at least from our perspective, we're trying to sort of reevaluate the entire CPM pricing structure anyhow. We're very focused on client performance. and some of the IPG companies have rolled out a pay-for-performance sort of system for us. So we are directly sort of connected with our clients' goals, and we're trying to extend that out as much as possible to publishers and partners across any screens. So more and more, we're trying to tie our pricing models to actual performance metrics, and the value of data is sort of, it's as valuable as it gets to that metric or proxy, whatever it is that we're optimizing against.
Yeah, go ahead, David.
Yeah, well, and then some of it also depends on what we can do with that data, if it's very specific to a single client or campaign, or there's more that we can get out of it, and then if there are other degrees of complexity, like matching it up with a client's a CRM database, and so there are a lot of factors out there on top of what Colleen was talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a media company perspective, data is the ante, right? I mean, ultimately, kind of that's what a big part of what you're selling is kind of this insight into a consumer that kind of brands and agencies can borrow or rent, I guess. So as we look at, again, our company, I mean, we've built up a database of 4 billion location tags, and that's what powers kind of our targeting ability and so much of what we do. And that's what we sell to the agencies and what we sell to the clients is this richness of data that gives us the insights and the understanding on kind of what we can do to kind of drive more effective advertising campaigns for them. So for us, I mean, that's kind of the heart. I mean, it's funny for me, like 6 months ago, I was like, we're kind of a mobile location company, but, as I look at our business now, I mean, a big part of me says, we're actually a data company, and I think for most successful media companies out there, at the heart of them is some sort of some data that they own that nobody else owns, and that's what they can bring to the party when they're talking to kind of agencies and clients.
Do we have any questions from the audience? We're on to questions. Back
All right.
to the right.
I got the mic. Where? All right, all the way in the back here. I'm coming. Todd's running on time. I'm impressed. Oh.
Hi, I'm Karthik. I'm with Blue Trumpet. So with all the targeting, well, based on the topic of this conversation, Facebook is coming out with a new API for advertisers that's going to allow them to reach into the entire database and allow third parties to target on their sites with their data. Obviously, that's going to have a huge impact on anything we know about user information and the specificity of that information. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes a ton of sense. So that API is rolling out both desktop and from a mobile perspective. I think it's interesting across screens for different reasons. So I think it'll be interesting to look at targeting outside of sort of the platform from a Facebook standpoint. I think when you think about sort of affinities and the value of a like, for example, now I'm switching to the mobile space, the value of a like versus kind of the value of an app download, it's two very different things, two very different levels of engagement. But at the same time, I think it's important that we sort of have that opportunity to target across the board with mobile. I also think it represents, I haven't really seen a lot of compelling sort of mobile exchange opportunities. So I think it will be interesting to see how this rolls out and see what it does to sort of move us forward with that kind of buying from a mobile perspective.
Yeah, and it will be really interesting because on Facebook, with online, a lot of the folks of Facebook Exchange and a lot of their new kind of forms of data usage are about monetizing Facebook.com better. And on mobile, it's just this really vast ecosystem of all these other publishers and apps that are tied into Facebook, and it's probably not going to be targeting too much on the Facebook mobile property itself because there isn't a lot of room to do so. And so I think it's going to be just very different approaches for marketers based on that.
Any other questions? I'm going once. Oh, I see. God, we got two down back there. All right, I'm coming. Here we go. All right, who raised his hand first? Somewhere over here. All right. Tell us who you're with.
I'm Neil Walker from Zenith. We spoke before in the previous panel about if you left the home without your keys, your wallet, and your phone, you definitely go back for your phone. What happens when the phone becomes the wallet? So NFC applications, I know the iPhone 5 dropped the ball and doesn't have that, but they have something similar. So when ISIS launches and you're able to track directly to purchase, do you think that's going to solve many of the issues?
Yeah, I mean, with the ISIS, the very like 0.1 stage of Passbook and 0.001 stage of NFC. So all this, like, I mean, they're getting closer, and so yeah, it's like with with maps and everything that happened on iOS, it was a really nice distraction for I know how early a stage Passbook is too, and so again, it's getting to that point where we know things will be in a few years, where we know what we want to do, but and any of these things are taking these baby steps forward, and then you see what a company like Square's doing, where just being able to pay without even taking out your phone, just as long as you have it in you and you've approved it for a certain location. And I think things like that actually have the potential to change consumer behavior as they scale. So there are a lot of really great models out there, and it's just trying to figure out which are the few that'll really win out.
Yeah, and I think, again, it's the whole thing that technology is outpacing the infrastructure a little bit too right now. Again, there's so many ways that we can approach kind of that closed loop solution, but if you think about the sheer cost that's going to go into a major grocery store chain kind of completely changing all of their scanners and registers to accept some sort of a kind of a in-phone payment or something like that, it's pretty daunting. So I think the technology is going to be there well ahead of the infrastructure, and then the infrastructure will catch up, and then I think there'll be a pretty quick adoption from a consumer perspective.
Yeah, I agree. I think it'll take us a little while to get any sort of broad-based learnings. We can look at things directionally. I do want to make the point, though, that NFC most often comes up when we talk about mobile payment, but I think that there are a lot of other sort of interesting and creative applications for NFC technology that might be easier to kind of test without having to rebuild the infrastructure of so many major retailers and institutions. So I think that there's something to be learned there as well.
Hi, Jonathan Wallet from Universal McCann. So basically, we talk a lot about data being like the bloodline of this, and similar to display with data's everywhere. And one thing we've seen just with my client alone is how to verify that data, how to validate it. So when you look at how much data is there available for mobile, what is being done, and how do you position it to clients to make them feel more comfortable that you're actually, when you're buying that set of data, that's the actual data you're getting or the audience that you're getting in that sense?
I can only speak to what we do at AdMobius. So the way we approach that is essentially for each piece of data that we generate we have some precision scores. So I spoke earlier about transparency and quantifiable reliability. That's what that means to us. So a platform that enables a buyer to know what's the precision that we have for each individual data point, for each individual ID. Does that answer your question?
All right. Any last questions?